Welcome everyone to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. Last week, we had a wonderful presentation from my friend Lorenzo on Cherokee medicine, part 1. Lorenzo talked a lot about the historical background and things relating to Cherokee medicine. This week, he'll go into a lot more of the specifics and answer questions from the audience. I hope you enjoy this presentation as much as I did. It was originally recorded for a community center talk he gave around 2011. So this isn't really an interview. It's just really a lecture that's being rebroadcast with his permission. I've edited out things like the, 5 minutes of chairs moving around. And I also edited out an introduction to the following week's talk. So it kind of ends kind of abruptly, and that's why, because the next lady is going to talk about intuition the following week or the following month. And since I didn't have her permission to have her recorded, I just cut that part off. But anyway, I hope that you really enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed putting it together. And let's all sit back and listen to Lorenzo as he continues his talk on Cherokee medicine.
I was reminded during the break, we were continuing to talk, as always happens. And I was reminded of a situation. The Cherokee country is the mountains of the Appalachian and Smokies. Geologically, are the oldest mountain chain on the face of the earth. A lot of energy there for a long time, a lot of gemstones in the ground, etc., etc., etc. But the other thing that most people don't know about, how many of you have ever marveled at the paintings of Queen Elizabeth I with all of her pearl collection on? Pounds and pounds and pounds and ropes of pearls up to teardrops like this. They're all American. They're not Persian. They're not Pacific. They came by the basketful out of the temples up and down the cultures from Florida to the Carolinas. And then after the colonials got here, they realized what a wealth that was. And so now all of the pinctada oysters are gone. By the early 1700s, they were fished out. So there are no more growing in America. There's still the river mussel pearls, which are pretty amazing sometimes too, the whites and the pinks. But the true pearl oyster, the shells used to get this big. You look at some of those pictures of white from the earliest sketches of the coast from Florida to North Carolina, and you see them with a gorget, a breastplate this big. You see them with funny, odd little things because you had European engravers, basically, who had never seen a terrapin shell, so they didn't know how to make that shape be something else. And so you see these ovoid sort of shapes with sort of lumpy things around them, and they turned them into pearls or stones or something. But it was turtle shell rattle, dance rattle. The big gorgets were the pinctada oysters, which would get this big. It's real easy to polish them and engrave them. There's gorgeous stonework or shell work through the whole Mississippian culture for all of those years. Looking at those early white drawings and also looking, one of the other associated things, there are hundreds of books on the Cherokee at this point, and particularly in the last 20 years. They've just come out of the woodwork. Probably 85% of them, if not greater percentage, were done by people who have no Cherokee culture whatsoever, that got it all in the libraries and maybe interviewed one or two people. The traditional routine in most cultures, when somebody who didn't have a need to know walked in the middle of a ceremony and said, "Oh, what's that?" and you don't touch things without asking in particular, they're going to be told it's an olive pit. And so it goes down in the history book as they wore olive pits for jewelry. And somebody now, 300 years later, who hadn't had any contact with their people, reads the book and says, "Oh, we wore olive pits." But if you've gotten any of the culture and your memory is there, you can look at even those old White etchings. White was the artist's name. And you recognize what they are. You recognize the weavings. Yes, indeed, we did weave fabric here. There were descriptions of fabric flags and banners at Etowah Mound in Georgia under some of the copper gorgets and copper embossed pieces, which came down from Michigan because we traded our mica books, which ran the furnace and fireplace industry for the colonial days for years, out of western North Carolina. I've seen mica books that were 6 feet across that would have beryl crystals in them that long and that big around as an inclusion in the mica. A lot of the Mississippian pieces, ceremonial and otherwise, were cut from those wonderful mica sheets. Those things were everywhere, were used in all of the cultures, but they went away fairly quickly when you could no longer get to the land, when they kept blocking us out and moving everybody out. But just as an interesting tidbit, go look at Queen Elizabeth in all of her pearl finery, and remember that's American.
The Guayangage say that we are still taking the blue marble, the gold, and the diamonds out of Manitoba. We're saying that the blue marble comes from Italy, when in fact it comes from native land in Manitoba.
There are traditions that a lot of our cultures hold that they don't talk about in public. There are a lot of the teachings about the medicine that's not talked about in public. Because one thing I should say is there are some books out there that have Cherokee formulas in them because they're charms and chants and spells that go along with the plant and how you use it, or just the charms and chants and spells. Some of them are dangerous. If you do not know what you're doing and you don't have the ethic, you can hurt yourself or you can hurt somebody else. And with the plants, if you don't know what you're doing, you can poison yourself or somebody else. So it's not a good thing to play with without some guidance. With many of the books that are printed out there, there's one on Northern California, plants, medicine plants used by the Pomo and the Maidu and the Wiyot all the way up the coast. That's a pretty good book. Shows good sketches of the plants, black and white line drawings, scientific names of the plants, description of the growing situations, etc., and a short description of the uses. There's only one problem. They didn't take the galleys to any of the tribal people and say, take a look at this. So with all of the medicines, there's a coyote and the real one. There's one that looks like the real one. 99 chances out of 100 it's poison. That's the coyote one. And so in that book, there's an illustration of balsam root, and they put the coyote one in and didn't know they'd done it. So even if you take that book and it's got pretty good descriptions and you go out and find this stuff and you start to ingest that, you can do yourself in quickly as a mushroom that you don't know. So even if you can find these books and you've got an interest, find somebody in the community that uses plants and just talk to them. Find out if there's something like the coyote that's in that book that could get you in trouble. Because there are things that can. As I mentioned earlier, it takes anywhere from 12 to 20, 30 years to learn all of the things that go with the culture. All of the things that are important to know about doctoring before you dare go out and do it. There was something still about the blue marble coming back, and I'm trying to remember now what it was in my head. Well, it'll come back. There are a couple things I wanted to read you quickly out of a couple other materials. This one is a fair overview out of a thesis from David Winston. our word, there were several words for the kind of doctoring that was done. There was also negative doctoring that was done. Spells to hurt people. Most doctors had those as part of their training, but the old ethic would not allow you to use them. But you had to know about them if somebody tried putting it on you, so you'd know how to counter it. The ethics are changing. There are, as the culture has shifted, there are an awful lot of people who are willing to learn a little bit of the medicine and have the ego involvement. I want to do this for me. I want to build what I can for this. To hell with you, pardon my French. And you will find now, I may read you a section on one of these pages, about a current doctor in Oklahoma. And he's very good. And there are people coming to him from all over the place. But what is he having to constantly deal with now? It's not sick people. It's people who learned a little bit of medicine and are doing the old cowboy bit. Oh, you're a gunslinger. I'm going to get you. Now I'm the top guy. And they're trying to do that with the medicine. They're trying to go after a valid, good guy who's helping people just to prove that they're better than he is. That's not in the ethic. That's totally against everything that we would have ever done. I've seen it here. I've seen it in this country. There are a tribe or two who are known for poison doctoring. And so people always knew, don't mess with them, don't get them upset. Yeah, some of those things can be real. But if you keep everything in balance and in harmony, you're probably not going to run into it. Okay, this was from a thesis. Cherokee medicine is an ancient system of medical spiritual knowledge and practices that developed over the last 3,000 to 4,000 years. This system of Melodi is what we call the main medicine, is still practiced in the mountains of North Carolina and in northeastern Oklahoma. Although there have been tremendous change for the Cherokee over the past 300 years, a core of indigenous belief and plant use remains. Training in Cherokee medicine takes 15 to 20 years. The apprentice needs to master 7 interconnected areas of knowledge. Herbal medicine, with all of the 400 to 600 plants that we commonly use out there. Most people come down to maybe 15 or 20 that they know most. Also, the lands are all changing. Since relocations, we've all been moved around the country. In the old days, there were prescriptions against mixing medicines. We believe as the tribes were set around the country, Creator gave us ways in each of the portions of the wheel to take care of the land and the animals in those areas. And there is no, despite all of the fighting we did over the Freedom of Religion Act in the 90s and the 70s, there is no Native American religion, even though that's what the federal documents said. There is Native American spirituality. They are parallel in those areas, but they're not the same. And so if I come from North Carolina and I'm asked to do something in Stockton for a tribe there, I have to find one of their captains in that area who's still functioning, if there is one, and ask for permission to do what I was trained to do on their land, because they're responsible for that land. Now that's all beginning to shift because the government made sure we're all mixed up with the relocations and everything else. The land is changing, the climate is changing, everything is changing. But some of those basic rules still apply. Physical medicine. There are a number of ways we even did surgery. I've talked to people whose grandparents were surgeons who used stone blades and gold blades and carried information on gold plates in the old script before Sequoyah invented it in 21, they were saying. No, it didn't. It was much older than that. He was the last surviving member of the Scribe Society. Oklahoma, with its mixed bloods and total Christianization, now goes with the official opinion that Sequoyah created it in 1821 because it's easier. Because you'd have to tell the truth that we were killing off our own people. Yes, Carol?
Can you explain what a medicine wheel is?
The circled cross. You see this representation around the world in all times and all cultures. Most cultures around the globe use the circle cross. The swastika is a variation of the wheel turning one direction or the other. You'll notice in some of the earlier swastikas long before Hitler that some were walking to the right, some were walking to the left. This is a representation, it's a mnemonic device for the globe, the path, your spiritual path at each of the positions, which are usually represented, although they're different by tribe, by a different color in that quarter, has a very strong meaning for that part of the learning from childhood through adulthood and return and leaving. And you can make several trips around the path, the wheel, etc. This is really, in a nutshell, the medicine wheel, that example of the circled cross, is used in a number of places on the ground as the central focus for certain types of medicine work. There's the big one up in the northwest that people go visit a lot, and you will see them in things like the earrings that I have on at the moment. It's not the same thing as a dream catcher. It is, again, a circle with a cross inside. In the southeast, it was the Philpott cross, so each one looped and flipped around. But it was very similar, and it represented the path that is done by the individual, it's done by the nation, that's done by life as we all go through the learning experience around the globe. Make more sense? Okay. Dream work. That was also very important to most of the Iroquoian people. So they had to know the dream work, how to help people do it and how to help people interpret it. Language, the myths, the laws, the studies of the culture, the ethics of where it all came from. The types of story, there are several different types of stories. And each one has its set of rules. For example, the animal stories can only be told in the winter. So you don't offend anybody. Ceremonies. There were 7 major ones. Now there are only 6 that are still being done, if at all, by some of the old traditionals. You will hear people going to stomp ground for a stomp dance around sacred fire. Even now, most of the mixed blood Christian part of the nation denigrates some of the fuller bloods who still do stomp dance because they look at it and say devil worship. One of the other things with the Sequoian syllabary, it's not an alphabet, it's a syllabary. Each of the characters stands for a sound in the language. Much of what Mooney got from the doctors he studied in North Carolina in the 1880s was giving him examples of their notebooks. In the old ways, we were trained as rememberers. You would never put anything down. And as one of my teachers says, if you're busy taking notes, your mind is not on the spiritual energy that's coming through you at that moment. We all do it at one point or another. But yeah, it is a thought process we can get into or get out of. And so in the old way, you never put anything down. It was only when it was all falling apart and the mixed bloods were killing people off and it was all collapsing and you wanted to get it down fast that some of these things were transcribed and were put down. But today in Oklahoma, with the predominantly Cherokee Baptists, and I'm sorry to keep talking about the religion, but it has been a factor. If the syllabary is printed, if it is typeset, as the Cherokee Phoenix was typeset, then that's okay. But if it's handwritten, as some of those medicine books are handwritten, or you start taking notes in it handwritten, that's devil worship. That's today's attitude. It's there. When we brought the carries in to teach a language class up here because we have a huge number of Cherokee in this area. Somebody would ask a cultural question, and Levi or Virginia would say, talk to him, we're Cherokee Baptist. We don't know any of that. They're two of the last 12 fluent speakers of Kituwa and Western dialect. Alive and spreading, they're teaching in schools, but they're fluent. They've got the old stuff, they've got the verb structures. They help the Kilpatricks do their stuff, and that reminds me, Kilpatrick's medicine, stuff that shouldn't be known. Levi says, I don't think it's bad, but we were taught all my life, that's anathema. We don't want to know that. That was the old ones. They did those things. We don't do that stuff anymore. He said, we don't know any of the culture. It was erased with removal. Actually, it was erased before the trade because the church made a very solid point in cahoots with the federal government to destroy the culture and make it anathema to everybody so they would become good white Americans who could sew and clean and go work for all the other people. Even though at the time of removal, most of the Cherokee farms, ranches, and houses were of a higher quality and condition than most of the colonials around them. Okay. Bad points of some parts of the medicine and how it's abused. I referred to the Kilpatricks. Levi and Anna were two very well-known full-blood Cherokee. She was a teacher. He was a college professor. An amazing musician with over 180 compositions. Stravinsky thought he was an amazing composer. Cherokee are usually considered incredibly musical people. If the genes are in there, there's music in some form or another. They noticed that in the 60s, in the mid-60s, there were a lot of old doctors' notebooks, Civil War letters showing up in the junkyard in Silver. Just pages and pages of stuff. People would go through and great-grandma's trunk, gone. And so there was a period in the mid-60s where people were cleaning out attics. A lot of the original enrollees were dying, and their stuff was being hauled to the dump. Well, the Kilpatricks went around gathering this stuff up because it is a treasure. And they spent years going through and pulling in the carries, my friends, to help translate some of this archaic stuff and the volumes. Their son is continuing to work with stacks of stuff that he now has at the university back east, since they're both gone. But among the books that they had done, they came up with doing one after removal from Oklahoma with some of the well-known Cherokee criminals. And do some of there are a couple categories. You got people do common stuff. Like here's a little spell to make sure dinner didn't go bad. There were all sorts of things that everybody did. But a lot of this heavy negative medicine to affect somebody else was unethical. But it happened. And during that period of the Wild West, when the nation was being destroyed, Cherokee Strip and the Outback was destroyed and taken away one more time. There was a lot of stuff that was being done that was very negative medicine. And Levi decided to do the book of the dark spells. And so they did. It's run toward the Nightland. And they put a lot of stuff in there. Of course, you need to know some of the basic stuff of how many times you do it, which direction you're facing, what color the people are you're calling in because of the direction. These are some of the mnemonics that if you're Cherokee, you've learned. And so you can look at a formula and you know what goes there. He was told there were still 7 national medicine men for the nation, Western band. And 1 from each of the clans. He was told it wouldn't be a good idea to do that book. It's not something you really need to put out in the general public. And people don't need to know those things. Well, he didn't listen. They did. They were translated. Levi told me about this because they helped translate some of the stuff, and he said, the doctors told him, don't do it. In less than a year after they published that book, Jack was dead. No apparent reason. He just kicked. Now, anybody who knows the old culture would say, should have known better. They told him, don't do it. But he did. And examples of how some of that stuff gets misused, if I can quickly find this one, is somebody who has recently written a book using a bunch of different tribes, stories in it, but she didn't know much about the people she was writing about. And she obviously read a little bit of the source material and then jumped to conclusions. And she's describing things that aren't possible, that don't exist, and she's putting it down as law, and she includes a formula and filled in stuff that should never have been put in there. You never put the person's name in, you never put the clan down. It goes in it, you know that, and you know where it goes in it, but you don't ever put it down. And she's got all this stuff down here and jumps to totally wrong conclusions about what it is and why it is and what it's for. And the spell that she's got in there doesn't even relate to what she's talking about. So there's a lot of that stuff that's out there. So a lot of them, you have to take them with a grain of salt. There's another major one that was one of the biggest ones put out, and it's about $50, and it's this thick, and he's combined a lot of wonderful illustrations and a lot of interviews with a few people who were still alive 20 years ago in Oklahoma and a couple in North Carolina. And he's read a lot of the old stories like the ALO and one or two of which says where we came from, and one or two of the other translations, but they're all done by ministers of the Christian church. So that tells you there might be a little bias in some of the translation. And, okay, I just lost that one. Gone. Sorry.
So you were talking about, this person put down bad things and died in a year, and then this lady elaborated on something completely
and
false.
somebody could pick it up and, and use it and not know that you can actually hurt somebody. These things, these words, these sounds, if you don't know the language and you're doing it in English, you don't have a leg up. If you know the language and you're doing the right sounds, those sounds are creating energy. Those sounds are doing things, whether you understand what you're doing or you can see the energy or not, is doing something. And one of the other factors in that is faith. Because as I mentioned before, when you've got the culture, you've got the background, you've got the setting, you have that structure. I believe this is part of my mindset. I can understand this, so somebody can pick up a symbol and hold it up. And in your mind, it's got a whole lot of stuff with it that you don't have to say. So in a lot of cases, the trappings do make a difference. The rattles do make a difference. Faith in what is happening makes a difference. The old ones understood the placebo effect. They also understood bacteria long time ago, that it was invisible stuff that would get into the system, and you would have to have something that would clean the gut and cleanse the blood to get rid of those things. So science, again, in this situation, is catching up to a lot of the principles that the old ones knew, that the old ones used. There wasn't a name for it at that point, but the names don't always matter. And it's serious stuff. Yeah, plants have changed. Yeah, you better be talking to the current ones because the chemistry of the land is different and our mindsets are different. And most of us are in a better position to be able to engage our own intent than we were, say, 20 years ago. Because that, again, is the major factor. If you're listening to someone who does doctoring do what they're doing, you may hear the chant like going, and you may not understand a word. Doesn't matter. They don't care if you understand it or not. It's the sound, it's the pitch, it's the rhythm, and it's what they're triggering with their intent because of that whole package that learning put into that song or one or two words in that song.
You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodypsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today? We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future.
Lorenzo?
Yes, Joe.
What reliable sources are available for anyone who might have a question about what we heard tonight, about anything regarding health?
You mean in learning medicine?
What reliable sources can any one of us
Somebody who is an acknowledged doctor?
No, that leads into another whole kettle of fish.
There are a number of books available at this point on the plants, for the plant medicines, that will tell you what they are. I don't know of one that will tell you what it is, where it grows, how to harvest, how to respect it. The first thing you have to learn with any of these trainings is respect and responsibility and right thinking. If those 3 R's are not there, forget it. You may learn 1 or 2 points from something, but if you don't understand the intermixture and the effect of mixing these things, you get the same thing with a much more deadly situation with contemporary medical pills. You got to be very careful, and I don't even go to a doctor. I got a question about a contemporary medicine, right straight to the pharmacist, because they're trained in interactions. They're trained in what these poisons will do, and that's a fact. Most medicines are poisons at one level or another. Most things that will drastically affect something that you screwed up long enough to be that bad is going to take something drastic to shift it. And along with it, you have to shift the mind, or you'll just bring it right back and put it back on. If you've had that pen sitting here for 40 years, and you've made friends with it, and somebody suggests taking it away, there's that whole, but that's part of me. It's a whole mindset to say, yeah, I don't need that. That doesn't belong here. Take it away. But you got to take it here first. Here first. And then you can do the other things to come through. But sadly, Joe, no, there's not anything. The best way is still apprenticing to somebody who knows what they're doing.
And how does that
and even then, you go with a mycologist mushroom hunting, and people die. Because of change. Because they intermix, change themselves more quickly than Monsanto can change the genes. That happens with all of the plants. So again, there isn't any single source. There are a lot of sources that will tell you a little bit about the plants, some that will tell you what they do, some that will suggest what a dose might be, but what it really comes down to, that person has to also have the awareness of the patient. They have to have the understanding and the link with the person they're working on. There's a group I know of who is doing an energy type of medicine, and at one point they were sending off people into trance and out of their body. And I said, you ought to have a protector. Who have you got who can go get them and bring them back if there's a problem? And they said, oh, I never thought about that. And I said, well, you better think about it. You take them out of their body and something happens. What you gonna have? Well, might not be a problem. A month later, a problem situation came up. I luckily knew that person well enough that I could communicate. And I immediately jumped while the person who was doing this was sitting back going, oh. And the person was gone. And I was able to get her back while everybody is standing around saying, what just happened? But they found a new toy. They could do this. They could take this person out. They could take them over here and get them to see what they could do. That's all well and good if you've got the responsibility to understand what goes around it. If you ask for it, you're going to get it. And everything else that comes around it. So you better have thought of the whole package, or you're going to get confronted with some real demons somewhere down the line that you didn't expect and you might not be armed for. But that, again, is forethought. Carolyn, you had a question.
Well, what difference is it between the Chinese medicine and the Indian medicine? They use
They use some of ours, we use some of theirs. Most of the sang that was used in Chinese medicine came from America. One of the first, you don't ever hear about this one of the first exports out of America, ginseng. Ginseng. American ginseng is still the highest rated of any ginseng out there, or anything they call ginseng. The first exports out of here were not the tobacco, was the medicine plants, the sassafras, the lady slippers orchids, the ginseng. They stripped entire states and shipped it all to Europe because they found out that these things work. 20 or 30 of the medicines fairly quickly went into the pharmacopoeia, and most of them are still there and are still the bases of a lot of stuff. Aspirin, your common one. Okay, Bayer discovered aspirin in Germany, but it came from the willowbarks in this country and some beaches, and it's still more gentle and more easily accepted by the body as willowbark than it is as aspirin. And you've heard it said that if aspirin were applying for patent today, it couldn't be granted because it's deadly. The willowbark isn't, and does the same stuff. But where can you go get willowbark today that's not totally contaminated by gasoline fumes or vapor trail? There are places I collected when I came out here the first time that I wouldn't dare go collect herbs now because they're so polluted. So it's getting rough on finding some of those things. When you're in an area, okay, I have to take that back. Historically, in the old days, before we totally screwed the world up, when you were in an area, the diseases that you were subject to in that area had a cure. Right there. Somewhere right nearby, there was a cure. Now we've done this blender bit to the whole world, and you don't know where it came from. You don't know where you got it. You don't know if somebody brought it in and sprayed it around the area. So it's a little more difficult to come up with things immediately local that will take care of the situation. We've got more genetically altered stuff now than we've ever had that isn't going to respond to any of the old stuff. We're learning to do more energy work that can affect it. So that is having to happen, but we still have to be responsible with the natural law of observing everything around. Our responsibility to keep it in balance, us in harmony with the land, with the animals, with the birds, If you want your soil to stay in good condition, don't spray all of the crap on it they say will go away in a week or two that never does, because it kills all the biota. And you've never got the soil developing and interacting anymore. It's just like stripping the topsoil off in the jungles. The topsoil may only be that thick after hundreds of years, but the balance is there, and everything works. You take the tree out, it washes out on the next heavy rain. You got nothing left. Another parking lot. The main thing is we need to think about those things that we're doing and our responsibility to help restore the earth around us, even in your yard, in your mind, in your thoughts of drawing people of common awareness together. We can purify water. Emoto's studies have shown that. Sacred sites, one drop of water from a sacred site, from Shasta, from the Panther Mountain Spring, from Lourdes, into a gallon of water with the right thought will activate that whole gallon of water. We can purify a polluted spring by getting together and consciously seeing that water's memory of purity. We can work on those things, we can clear those things, we can help correct the world around us. But if we allow ourselves to get caught in fear, we're gone. They got us. And we will never understand what we're fully capable of doing as human beings. Joe, yes.
When I have a question about my life, its extension, or anything, I never call the FDA.
Good point.
Unless I want to know what they're for and what they're against, and then I know how to act.
Yep, that is a major factor. And we do have to consider all that, because the preponderance of what's going on in the world out there at this point in the age is not for our benefit. It's for somebody else's benefit in ways that we don't necessarily want to look at. But your mind, your intent can be brought to bear on all of this. We can correct a lot of this. We can support each other. We can help take care of each other and the earth around us. Any other questions, Joe?
Yeah. Is our intuition or intuitive feelings closer to the truth than anything that we get from outside ourselves?
According to me, I would say so. Could everybody hear this question? Is our intuition good enough, effectively? You can hone your intuition by using it, by practicing it, by depending on it. I went through a period at one point in college where for years I thought I had a vivid imagination, because I would talk about something and then it would happen on the radio 2-3 hours later or in the paper the next morning. I still thought this was my vivid imagination. At one point in college, there were a string of things that happened so closely together that there was no denying the fact that my mind was in touch with something out there that was not what everybody else did. And I had a couple friends that I could trust. And I said, okay, I'm going to check my odds with you. I'm going to start saying everything that comes through my head, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent. For this block of time, if it comes through, I'm saying it. I want to see what the odds are. When you start using it, it's amazing how accurate it is. As long as you're still thinking, nah, it couldn't be real. It won't be. You won't get it unless it's life-threatening and you really need to know. But if you start using your intuition, you will hone it, and it will become another very powerful tool. And in the old way, you can, there are ways of doing kinesiology testing. How many of you know about kinesiology? Okay. I could take a bottle of medicine in the store and say, I want to know if this is good or not. Your body knows. Your aura goes way beyond 2 or 3 feet. Your awareness is out there on the ends of that and all in between. And when you interact with something, your body senses what's going on with that. If it's something that's good for you, if it's something that's not good for you, or if it's, why bother? Use that. You can use that in the grocery store. Pick up a peach, and if your hand suddenly drops a little bit, no chemicals. Because if it's good for you and it's ripe, it's going to be, wow. But I've seen this done with the music testing. I've seen this done with testing a witness in medicines and that type of thing. And your muscular tone will change if it's not good for you. And you can pick up an apple that's been sprayed wrong, and if it drops, you may not be able to wash it off. It might have come up through the inside. There was a place last year I used to stop on 70 on the way to see one of my Weot elders in Sacramento and pick up fruit because they had a lot of stuff there naturally. And all of a sudden it started getting to the point that you could cut open an apple or a peach and taste the petroleum distillates inside. It wasn't on the outside. It was coming up through the soil, into the tree, into the fruit, and at that point I'm not doing anything healthy for my body, but eating this fruit because it's all chemical. Okay, it's 5. We're supposed to be out of here. Is there one fast last question? Somebody wanted to ask something that we didn't get to? Yes.
What are some tools that you would recommend to everyone to greater enhance your intuition?
Practice on simple things around you. Practice on mail that's coming in from the mailbox before you go to the mailbox. What's in the mailbox? Is it bill? Is it a letter? It's a letter. What's in the letter? Practice with people you're going to see. What's the first thing they're going to say? There are all sorts of little things you can start doing that you will see in volume, whether you're picking up on their responses or not. Picking up a book and saying, oh, for the heck of it, what's on this page? And see if you have some concept, and then look and see. Maybe a word or two is in there, maybe it isn't. You will begin to sense a feeling and a difference in what's your mind and what's somebody else's mind. And that may take a while. But you can begin to distinguish the difference in thoughts and thought patterns. Just practice. If there's somebody you can trust, like I did with that couple, practice with them. Say, if something pops into my head, I don't care how stupid it is, I'm going to say it. Let me know if it rings a bell. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. But the more you do it, you'll begin to see the difference in the understanding. Joe?
Going back to the beginning of your talk, I was struck by the information that all the peoples of the world, each of us has in us the DNA of anybody in a whole Western world going back millions of years.
Yep.
And so that's why I have this belief in my own intuitive powers, that there's something there. Just like when you meet a stranger for the first time, you immediately like or dislike that person, and you don't know why. That's intuition.
That's intuition, and your consciousness at the higher level beyond the physical third-dimensional form, interacting with theirs, interacting with the memory of, we used to be enemies. I used to fight you. That's still in there. I have to work on that. Or, wow, I remember this wonderful time. It doesn't matter whether you remember the time or not. What we began to understand, I don't know who needed to be a king, who needed to be a queen, who needed to be a charmaid. We learn something from every time we're in a physical body. We come into that body with an agenda that we brought with us to grow. When you find out, oh, in this lifetime, I learned to quit doing that to people. Hey, that's major. That's the important thing. I don't care if your name was Joe Schmo. The important thing was that you learn not to do that to people anymore, that there are consequences. So those memories are still in there. Those interactions can still be in there. And the more you use it, the more sensitive you'll be. Joe?
I just wanted an illustration you may have heard before that when I was a sailor in New York City, going into World War II, I was walking down Fifth Avenue in New York, and a complete stranger, two ladies came up, and one walked up to me and slapped me right in the face. And this definition of intuition. And I said, why did you do that? She said, you remind me of my ex-husband. That's what I relied on all my life.
And then responsibility comes into play. You may see that, but you're not going to go slap it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all for
coming. On the subject.
Well, I think that was just a really, really interesting and fascinating show. I particularly liked the intuition part at the end. Now, I know from talking with Lorenzo personally that at the time he was a little concerned because he didn't get to wrap up really in quite the way he wanted to, because it kind of went off into the intuition question and never really got back to being able to sum up. Because of time constraints, he just wasn't able to go back and really finish his thoughts. So hopefully at some point we can have him back on the show with another actual interview, and maybe he can catch up on some of the things he wanted to say in the public lecture, and maybe also talk to us a little bit more about intuition and other things. Anyone who's interested can go back in the archives at Time Monk Radio Network and listen to part 1 of this lecture, or the interview I did with Lorenzo just a couple of months ago in California, which is kind of an introduction to a Native American viewpoint on history and a lot of other topics. However, for now, I think that about wraps up tonight's show. I look forward to meeting with you all again next time with Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.